Hi BookTube, it's Missy, and today I'm here to give you guys the review for Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. Here is the cover. So this book came out on August 18th. It is the second book from Tiffany McDaniel, I believe. I did read her debut novel, which was The Summer That Melted Everything. I will leave a link down below to that review. I will also, I think it comes over here. I will also try to leave the iCard or regular, I don't know what it's called, in the corner if you guys want to watch that review of the author. And yeah, so Tiffany is she is part Native American and part white, and this is a story that is very close to her because it is a story about her mother. Now, from what I can gather, it is a fictional story of what her mother went through when she was a little girl. So I think the names are correct in the story, but maybe the situations were slightly different. And yeah, so I'm gonna have a really hard time with this review, and I do apologize. So yeah, the book came out on August 18th, and I did receive a ebook copy of it, I think back in June maybe. And I meant to read it all summer, but you know, it got away with me, and I hate reading ebooks. I hate reading ebooks, one, because I don't know what page I'm on, so I can't decide like when to stop, and two, because I don't see it every day, I forget about it. And so when I finally was able to read the book, I decided, like all things I do in life, I was going to cram, and not necessarily cram, but you know what I mean. Like I wanted to have it read, so I decided I was going to read it the weekend before it came out. So it came out on a Tuesday, I believe. Maybe it was a Thursday. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But I planned to read it over the weekend, and I did start it, and I think I got maybe to chapter 2 or 4 and started bawling. And that was my experience with the book. Every single chapter I would start crying, to the point where, like, I've never filmed really did a vlog of me reading a book, but I was like my face was tight, and I would have to stop and like hold in the tears a lot. Like this is the most crying I have ever done in a book since like high school when I was reading Night. And yeah, because that's about the Holocaust. Like this was so just completely heart-wrenching. And I finished it I think a few days after it was published, like where it had like the book birthday. I finished it a couple days later, and on the 18th is when my kids started distance learning, so I knew for a fact I wasn't going to be able to like fully read it and have the review up and ready for you guys by its book birthday. And so I decided that I would really take my time with this book, because not only did Tiffany deserve that kind of attention to the story, but also, oh, I'm starting to move a little bit. You have to keep seeing the picture. But I mean, the book really deserved it. Her mom deserved it, because this book is about her mother. The matter in the book, like what it's about, deserved my 100%, you know, complete attention. And yeah, so I'm gonna try not to cry during this review. And this is the reason why I waited an entire month to review this book, because every time I started this video I would start crying, and I don't want to be a sap, but this is truly an important read. I think everybody should read this, not only because it's something that happened in our past, but it's still going on today. So I think this was such a good time for this book to come out, because we are dealing with this kind of issues right now. So this book is about Betty. Now, Tiffany's mother's name is Betty. And now Betty's mom is white and her dad is Native American. And they had, they had like 10 kids. Was it 10? They had a lot of children. Some of them passed away when they were super small, and then the rest of the kids passed away over their like childhood. So I think in the book, I don't know if this is true in real life, but in the book, Betty and her brother Lint is the last two that survived their childhood. And I don't think that's considered a spoiler. It just lets you know that the situation that they grew up in was pretty sad. So they grew up back in the 60s, or at least Betty was, I think she was born in like 60 something. Ugh, maybe I should have written this stuff down. Although that's not really part of the review. It doesn't matter. I always want to have like facts when I'm doing reviews, and it doesn't matter. This is my emotional opinion about the book. So they had a lot of children. Before they had their kids, Betty's mom was living in a situation that is, I don't know how rampant it was back in the day or how rampant it is now, but it's not a situation that I would want to have grown up in. She did have a brother, and the brother had passed away. I think all of this would be spoilers, so I'm not going to talk about how the brother died, and I'm not going to talk about, well, I don't know. There are triggers in this book. I guess I'll start with the triggers and then continue on. So there is incest in this book. There is rape in this book. There is harming yourself, like trying to kill yourself in this book. There is discrimination, so much discrimination in this book. There is abuse in this book, and there is a little bit of animal harm, and what else? You know what's funny is, well, it's not funny, but you know what, the Summer That Melted Everything had the same nuance as this book is, because it's set in the same fictional town of Brevard, Ohio, and that's where Tiffany's from, is from Ohio. And so, okay, so now that you have your triggers, you know what the book is about, well, not about, but you know what the book has in it, then you can decide whether or not you feel it's important enough to read for yourselves. So, like I said, Tiffany's grandma, Betty's mother, came from a really dysfunctional home, and Betty's mom, her name was Alka, A-L-K-A, I think, Alka. She had a really bad childhood, and the mom was in on it and didn't do anything to keep her from being harmed. And so when Betty was old enough to run away, she met Landon. Hold that thought. I just want to make sure that I'm saying their names right, because if I say the dad's name wrong, you know, the whole time I'm saying this review, I'm going to be super bummed because it's annoying. Name's Landon. The older brother's name starts with an L as well, and I kept getting that confused, not while reading, but afterwards. So anyways, so yeah, so Landon met Alka when she felt she was about to run away, and she started a relationship with him. And Landon went and talked to her dad, and the dad was completely upset about it because Landon is Native American, and back in the day, in the 60s, they called Native Americans colored. So anybody who had dark skin or brown skin was considered colored, and Landon grew up really being pushed around and discriminated against. People used to call him derogatory names. They would tease him that he should be wearing feathers, and they would do like the oh around him, and that's just like, it's so rude to treat people like that. And that's what drove me crazy, is just like the feeling of being in that kind of state of mind all the time, where you know that people are going to make fun of you for something that you can't help, really triggered me. Because, and I know it's not the same, but when I was growing up in Hawaii as a haole, even though I have Hawaiian blood and I'm also Filipino, but you can't tell, even though I am not fully white, growing up in Hawaii, I was teased about being haole, about not being from Hawaii. And I was born in Oceanside, California at Camp Pendleton. My dad was in the Marines. And so the kids would tease me about that too. Oh, you were born on the mainland, which means you're not from Hawaii. And again, having a place that you grow up in, a state that you grow up in, and actually being that blood, that actual ethnicity is completely two different things. And I am Hawaiian, but you can't tell. And so I was teased about it. And that's totally different than what Landon had to deal with growing up, because he was teased and he was ridiculed and he was punished at work. People would kick him, they would be beating him up and everything because he was dark skinned. I didn't get beat up. I wasn't being like light skinned. I was never seen as less, I guess, in the general sense, but growing up I felt I was different from the children that was around me. And the kids that I grew up with were not all Hawaiians, but they were Filipinos, like full Filipino or full Japanese or full Chinese, or, you know, we have Hawaii, the islands themselves are a giant mixing pot. When my great-great-grandfather moved to Hawaii, maybe it was just two greats. When my great-grandfather moved to Hawaii, he was a boxer in the Philippines, and he was recruited to go to Hawaii because of the sugar cane. They told him a whole bunch of lies about how it was paradise, how he would be able to marry a Hawaiian lady, and how it would be like beaches and sunsets and perfect all the time. But lo and behold, my grandpa ended up being a slave on the sugarcane fields. And then he had like 9 girls, which infuriated him, because then there was no one to really like share his name, and like, you know what I mean? Like, men are always wanting to have an heir to themselves, and my grandpa ended up having 9 daughters. So he was not happy about that. But he did end up meeting and marrying a Hawaiian lady. And so it's like the struggles that people grow up with and the struggles that people face, it's frustrating when people on the outside, like these white people on the outside, don't think about Landon as a person. They think of him as a color. And see, I'm already starting, and at least this is it took a lot longer in the review to get to this point. Anyways, so the way Landon was treated really messed me up. I was crying because it's not fair. It's not fair to be treated differently. And it's not fair to be treated differently because of monetary gains either. I grew up extremely poor, and they teased me about that. They teased Betty and her siblings because they were poor. And it's just really sad. So Alka and Landon take off. They get away from the dad, and then they have their own babies. And then year after year, they have this horrible thing that happens to their family, like it's cursed. The dad, because again, he is Native American, and I don't think he went all the way through school. But he only had jobs like in the mining, down in the mines, or he would have like carpentry work, or because he is Native American and his mom and grandma taught him all about the herbs that grow around, he knew how to make certain salves and different kinds of like drinks and medicines. He was kind of like a medicine man, and people would come to him to get these home remedies to take away diarrhea and cough and insomnia and things like that. So it was so hard for Betty and her siblings to go around like that. And you know how genetics work. The mom was white, the dad was dark. And some of the kids grew up with blonde hair, and some kids, especially Betty, grew up with brown eyes, brown hair, and a darker complexion, just like her father. And so even though her siblings went to school with her, she was the one that got spanked by the teachers and ridiculed by the teachers and told how she's a liar and she's dirty and how she's not good enough because of the way she looked. And to think, because I'm a teacher, I would never treat a child like that. It's the worst feeling in the world to know that adults, they see children picking on you and they go, I think that's a great idea, I'm going to do the same thing. And it just broke my heart to know that Betty had to deal with this growing up. And again, this is a fictional story, but it's set and based on a true life experiences. So the mom was ridiculed growing up, and I don't know how much abuse she took from the school kids or her teachers. It could be all true, I don't know. But it's just so sad to think that they would treat a child like that. And more heartbreak happened to the siblings. More bad things continued to happen. More deaths. Finally, they settle in Breathed, Ohio, and they try to make a life for themselves there. And they grow up there for the most part until I think Betty was ready to leave from high school. And there was a girl that was their neighbor. When they first moved in, I think Betty was 6 or 7, something like that. She was going into like first grade. And the little girl across the street didn't know any different. And so she was bouncing a ball in her yard, and Betty went over and she was like, "Hi, I'm Betty." And the girl said, "I'm so-and-so." And she started playing ball with her, like bouncing the ball back and forth. And then her parents came out and said, "Why are you trying to steal this ball?" And Betty's like, "I'm not, I'm playing with your daughter." And they're like, "You're not allowed to." They were talking to to the little girl. "You're not allowed to talk to this girl. She's dark skinned, she's stupid and gross and dirty, and look at what she's wearing, and ew, yuck. If you talk to her, if you look at her, you're going to look like that, or you're going to end up like her." And so, again, we're dealing with this right now with Black Lives Movement and other racially, it's devastating. It's devastating that we're in 2020 and it's still happening. Like, how much time do we need to realize that we're all people? And so the parents are the ones who pass that kind of hatred on to their children. If your child talks like that, they didn't learn it anywhere else but from home. And that's always been, what happens. You don't just go to school and learn to be mean. You learn it from home. And so the neighbor girl ended up hating Betty all her life. And the thing that really made me cry, well, lots of things made me cry, but when Betty was about to leave from Breathed and she was going to move on and like do something with herself, she caught up with that girl, that mean neighbor. I can't remember her name right now, and she you know, the girl was like still talking trash to her. She was still saying like, and they're like 17, 18 years old now. And the girl is all like, you're ugly and stupid and worthless. And Betty went and hugged her. And she was talking to her in her ear. And she said, you know, I forgive you for not knowing that this is bad. I forgive you for not liking me, for thinking that it's okay to be this way. And I hope in the future that you can understand what it's like, and I forgive you. And how strong and brave of Betty to go up to her, you know, nemesis, her adversary, and say, I forgive you for treating me like this my entire life. It was a very emotional roller coaster to read about, and I think it's important that everybody puts themselves in other people's shoes and understands what it's like to be at the other end, you know, of the stick. Like, being poked and prodded is not fun. Being humiliated and abused is not fun. Watching somebody being abused and tolerating that is not fun. If you watch somebody being beat up or ridiculed for the way they look, for the way they what they wear, how they act, you are an accomplice to that. And it was really hard. And what was so beautiful about the book was that the father was so good with his children. He was so good. He had nothing. He wasn't educated. He wasn't, you know, rich. He did what he could. He taught his children the ways of his mother and grandmother. He taught them how to live with the culture that they should have been brought up with. He showed them his culture and taught it to them and made them memorize it so that way they could share the culture with their children. And it was sad because the mom, Betty's mom, also ridiculed Betty for being dark-skinned. There's a point in the book where Betty wants to go out trick-or-treating, even though she knows that, you know, people are mean. She wants to go get candy too, like everybody else. And, you know, they're poor, so they can't just go out and buy costumes. And the mom decides to make a costume for Betty, and she turns her into a witch. She says she's a witch. She dresses her up, and then she takes eyeliner, and she says, oh, don't worry, Betty, I'm drawing a flower on your face. And so Betty doesn't think anything about it because she's little. You know, she's like 7, and she goes outside, and that mean neighbor starts laughing at her, and she goes, I always knew you were a hag. And Betty's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, why do you have that written on your face, hag? And so Betty goes and runs and starts crying, and the dad sees what happened, and the dad goes, why did you write that on your face? She goes, I didn't, Mommy did. And so the dad, Landon, he, you know, erased it and drew a flower on her face and made her feel good. And it's just, when you're abused when you're little, sometimes you can't get away from that, and then so you also abuse your children. And in the mom's case, I don't know if she fully loved her husband because he was Native American, and that was taboo, and people didn't like that they had interracially mixed, and the mom probably felt guilty because of that in some aspect, and she probably also felt guilty because he was such a good father to the children and he tried to provide for them, but she was lashing out because she was hurt. And the mom had lots of issues, and it's not her fault that she was the way she was because the way she was raised was awful. This whole book makes you think. It makes you think about things you don't want to think about. Like, again, it goes back to how I was raised and what I was going through. Culturally, we're not the same, you know, but growing up poor, I can understand that. Being poor sucks. Not fitting in with your surroundings sucks. Being made fun of because of things you can't control sucks. And then you have to think about the way you were raised. Like, some things happen that you can't control from your family, and you can choose to overcome that and do better than what they did, or you can be a part of the problem and continue on with that cycle of abuse and negativity and whatever else. And I don't want to get into like what happened with my family because, you know, it's private, but I understood for the most part with what Betty was going through. Not, of course, the beatings and being ridiculed for being dark-skinned. That's completely something that I will never be able to understand. But I tasted some of that growing up, and it doesn't feel good. And I think everybody should, like I said, read this book. It is so powerful, so important, and it's still happening today, and it's so heartbreaking to know that we haven't changed. Humanity hasn't changed. People haven't changed. They get stuck in a rut, how they live their life, how they were raised, and they don't change those ideas. It's like if your parents are a certain religion, then you end up being that religion. Not everybody, of course. Some people decide religion is garbage and they don't want to have anything to do with it because they resent the way they were raised. But some people, they don't know how to go about finding out religion on their own, and so they just adopt anything that their parents say. That goes to how you punish your children. You know, if your parents spanked, then maybe you'll spank too. If your parents were Catholic, maybe you're also Catholic. If they are a certain, like, political party, say Republican or Democrat, you don't know any better when you're 18, and so you decide, well, I'll just join whatever party my parents were from. It's not really laziness, it's familiar. And so when you are around something that is familiar to you, you just gravitate towards that. So this review is kind of like all over the place, and I don't know if you really got the full grasp of what this book is about, but it's not a fictional book with a fantasy setting where there is like a conflict somewhere down the line, and then the hero or our protagonist has to overcome that in the end. It's more of it's like a literary fiction, family drama, important commentary, you know? It's something that needs to be shared and talked about, like I said, because it happens all the time. And we don't really hear much about Native Americans. At least I don't. On the news, we heard about the pipelines going up and how they were against that, which they absolutely should be. But we don't really hear much about Native Americans anymore, and they suffered greatly at the hands of early Americans. And it's sad, and it needs to change. And, yeah. So, thank you so much for listening to this review. I'm sorry if it was kind of rambly. It is very emotional, and it's just so hard for me to talk about. I could barely even write this review. I will leave the written review down below so you guys can see it anyway. But if you are interested in Betty's story, please pick up this book. It is absolutely worth it. It was a 5-star read. I don't think I've been emotionally devastated by a book in a really, really long time. Like sometimes I'll read about like a child being hurt or something and I'll cry in a story, but not through the entire story. And if you don't like crying, I would read this anyway. It's not cheesy like a Hallmark movie. It's ruthless and important, and yeah. So thank you so much, Tiffany, for sending me the ebook to your newest book that you wrote. I really enjoyed it. I think it was super powerful, and I just appreciate you taking the time to reach out to me and send it to me. So thank you guys all so much for watching this review, and hopefully you'll pick up the book as well. It's already out, I think, in paperback and hardcover. I might be wrong. Like I said, I read it on an ebook. So that's it. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much. Bye.